Every morning at precisely 6 a.m., Grace Langley would quietly rise from her creaky twin bed, careful not to wake her 8-year-old son, Jacob, sleeping soundly beside her in their small one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago. The building was old, the radiator knocked loudly in the winter, and the wallpaper peeled like a tired sigh, but it was home, and more importantly, it was hers, paid for by endless double shifts, sacrificed sleep, and an iron will forged in the aftermath of abandonment. Years ago, when Grace's husband walked out without a word, leaving her with a toddler and a heap of unpaid bills, she had two choices: break or build. She chose to build. She found work where she could, cleaned homes during the day, waitressed at night, and took online courses whenever she had a sliver of time. When she landed the office assistant job at Branton and Elridge Consulting, it felt like a step into something stable. A firm with a polished downtown office, leather chairs, and glossy business cards. She believed it would be a new chapter. But what awaited her behind the glass doors wasn't a team, it was a hierarchy. From day one, Grace was spoken to with veiled dismissal, often referred to not by name but by her role, the assistant, as if her identity began and ended at her desk. She fetched coffee, printed reports, set up meetings, cleaned up conference rooms, and stayed late whenever others left early, but was rarely thanked, never included, and always overlooked. Yet she kept showing up, not just to keep the lights on at home, but because she still believed that consistent goodness would lead somewhere. She hoped her kindness wasn't invisible. But months turned into years, and while others rose, especially Mason, a smug junior manager who often forgot basic facts yet excelled at claiming credit, Grace remained stationary, passed over for even the most modest roles despite her loyalty, her sharp mind, and the quiet brilliance she tucked into her tasks. It wasn't that she didn't try, she'd offer ideas in staff meetings only to be interrupted or ignored, her words bouncing off the glass walls like echoes in a canyon. Once, she had rewritten a flawed client presentation in the dead of night, catching multiple errors that would have embarrassed the firm, but instead of being thanked, she watched Mason present her work as his own. Still, she said nothing. She had Jacob to think of. The health insurance. The rent. But pain has a way of stacking in the corners of the soul, and eventually, it begins to shift the furniture of who you are. One Thursday afternoon, gray clouds pressed low against the skyline and rain lashed the office windows in steady waves. Grace had just returned from picking up a lunch order, 6 overpriced salads and 1 forgotten smoothie, when she overheard raised voices in the executive conference room. The partners were arguing about a crisis with Foster Dynamics, one of their biggest clients. The account was mishandled, deadlines were missed, and now the client was threatening to walk, taking millions of dollars and their reputation with them. Grace paused outside the door, heart thudding. She knew this project inside out. She had managed all the coordination when it first came in, quietly building a relationship with the client's team, creating an onboarding document, and even drafting an alternative proposal when the original seemed weak. She'd saved every version on her own drive, just in case. In that moment, something shifted in her. She didn't knock. She walked in. The partners, Mr. Branton, Mr. Elridge, and the ever-anxious VP of Operations, all turned to stare at her. "Grace, now's not a good time," someone muttered. But she stood firm. "I think I can help," she said, lifting the folder in her hands, her voice steady but soft. Mr. Elridge raised an eyebrow. "Help with what?" "The Foster Dynamics proposal. I worked directly on it. I have an updated version, one the client might actually respond to." There was a tense silence. Then, with little else to lose, they waved her forward. She laid out the revised proposal, outlined the communication she had with the client's assistant, and described the concerns she had logged weeks ago, all of which had been ignored. As she spoke, something rare unfolded. They listened. Not out of kindness, but necessity. Within the hour, she was on a video call with Foster Dynamics, representing the company she had worked for but never been recognized by. She was calm, articulate, thorough. The client was impressed, and more importantly, reassured. They agreed to stay. The next day, Mason was called in for an internal review. It was discovered that he had misrepresented timelines, dismissed warnings from Grace, and submitted her work as his own on multiple occasions. He was terminated. HR tried to wrap it all up neatly, offered Grace a title, project lead, and a raise. But Grace had already made her decision. That night, after the client call, she received an email from the COO of Foster Dynamics, praising her clarity and leadership and asking if she'd consider joining them directly. They offered her the position of Director of Strategic Partnerships, a significant salary increase, remote flexibility, and full educational support for her and her son. When she handed in her resignation, the office buzzed with disbelief. The same co-workers who had once walked past her as if she were furniture now stopped to offer congratulations, or hollow apologies. One even cried. But Grace wasn't angry. She hadn't done it to prove a point. She had done it because, at long last, someone had finally seen her. On her final day, she pinned a small handwritten note to the breakroom board. It read, "Never mistake quiet for weak. Never mistake kind for naive. Some of the strongest people build in silence. And when the time comes, they rise." Months later, the partners introduced a new internal mentorship program focused on support staff development, naming it the Langley Initiative. Grace, meanwhile, settled into her new role at Foster Dynamics with joy and purpose. She attended Jacob's school play for the first time in years without needing to request time off. She spoke at women's conferences about perseverance and dignity. And on weekends, she volunteered at a local organization that helped single mothers re-enter the workforce, mentoring them not just in resumes and interviews, but in self-belief. One evening, while tucking Jacob into bed, he looked at her and said, "Mom, are you famous now?" She laughed, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "No, baby. I'm just finally where I was always meant to be." In a world that often confuses loudness with leadership, Grace proved that grace, the quiet, resilient, unwavering kind, can carry a person not just through hardship, but all the way to the top. And for everyone who had ever been disrespected, underestimated, or overlooked, her story stood as a quiet roar, "You are more than they see. And one day, they will regret not seeing you sooner."